Okay, so people are coming into KAICIID's webinar today on empowering youth towards building a culture of dialogue. We're just waiting for our around 80 participants to come into the Zoom meeting, and then we will get going in a couple of minutes. Welcome to the KAICIID webinar on empowering youth towards building a culture of dialogue. We are just waiting a few minutes for more participants to come in, and then we will start. Welcome to the KAICIID webinar on empowering youth towards building a culture of dialogue. It is now 12:05, so we would like to start with the webinar. So we're pleased to see many of you joining today's webinar discussion on equipping young people to become change makers and leaders of local communities. My name is Elizabeth Perks, and I am Programme Manager of a portfolio of programmes and resources on the KAICIID Dialogue Knowledge Hub, and I am your moderator today. Before we start, I'd like to give a few reminders on our house rules. We'd like to let you know that we are recording this webinar, and it will be published on the Dialogue Knowledge Hub platform. So if you need to leave early, want to revisit a section, or share it with friends and your community, please do so by visiting the Dialogue Knowledge Hub webinar page, and the link to that will be posted later on in the chat by my colleague Anya Pisko. The presentation will be followed by a Q&A, and if you look towards the bottom of your screen, you can see the Q&A button for asking questions to our panelists. There is also a chat column where we would be really pleased if you'd like to write in your name and tell us who you are, where you're from. And lastly, as online resources are being used all over the world, we do apologise now if there are any technical difficulties, but we are doing our best to address those challenges. And thank you for your understanding. So before I move to introduce our speakers today, yes, please let us know about yourselves as well. So I would like to give a very warm welcome to our guest speakers today, Chantal Swisserun, Tim Fawcett, and Rabia Barkush. Chantal Swisserun is an entrepreneur and founder of Unite, which holds training events to empower and transform youth, offering them bright futures and leadership skills. Chantal is a specialist on project leadership and training in a number of fields, including interfaith work, youth empowerment, and refugee initiatives. She has founded several award-winning initiatives and leadership projects for young professionals. Welcome, Chantal. Tim Fawcett heads cross-cultural innovation program at Scriptures Union Australia, giving resource chaplains and youth workers the tools to work effectively across cultures while meeting the social, emotional, and spiritual needs of children and young people from all communities. He is also the founding CEO of The Feast, a UK-based charity providing safe spaces for young people of different faiths and cultures. Welcome, Tim. Radia Barkush also specialises in youth empowerment and champion of bridge building between communities, interreligious dialogue, and peace education. She is currently the president of KAICIID in France, an interfaith youth-led movement offering young people opportunities to experience diversity in a positive way through one-year peace education programs. Welcome, Radia. We would like to start now with the presentations, and Chantal, please begin.
Okay, let's see, here we go. Yes, let's hope this works. Great. So welcome everybody. I'm usually talking way too much, so I'll try to keep my 10 minutes. I'm sitting here in Amsterdam, and it just felt wrong to not start with what's going on with the current COVID crisis. So I wanted to offer you some nice perspective on what youth is doing here at this moment before I start my regular presentation about youth involvement. For example, some of the religious youth movements are still continuing to do courses and trainings for their kids. They usually see live, but now it's on Zoom. And the first thing they did was a writing and art workshop to offer drawings and cards to elderly that are closed in their elderly homes and with no way to go and no family to see. So they receive these drawings from these children. And I think it's a very nice thing. Another thing that is going on is a Jewish organization. I'm Jewish myself, so I know a lot of what that community is doing. And they're mobilizing students to help elderly from the allowed distance, 1.5 meters, or literally from further away, to how to use tools like Zoom. We're on Zoom now, like WhatsApp, like all the tools that you can actually speak to people without seeing them live. So there's students helping them. And most importantly, many students are doing groceries for people who either cannot afford it because of the crisis or are old and vulnerable, and it's scary for them to leave their homes. There's actually a lot of solidarity. And in my own community, I see younger, but not just younger, also older people who are actually doing a lot, like Jewish and Muslim community together, like with the imam and the rabbi, to take initiatives, for example, to go to each other elderly homes, give them special foods from the particular community, play the music outside, get family to wave so they can see their relatives, and bring flowers. And we saw the Muslim community starting this in the Jewish elderly home, which was very struck by COVID, like 1/5 of the population passed the past 2 weeks, which is very intense. So we decided to mirror their great initiatives and now go combined forces. So we'll go to a Christian shelter for homeless. We'll go to a Muslim elderly home, El Nur, this next Thursday, right after Pesach, because we're still in the middle of a Jewish holiday called Passover. So there's a lot of good things going on amidst of this crisis that shows the resilience of people and of young people. This is just something I wanted to share. Now I know I lost a lot of my time, but I thought it was important to share anyway. So everybody that is in this work has some role models. I have many, like Martin Luther King, for example, but one who's very particular to me is this lady. I hope, oh, no, my navigation doesn't work. Yes, I hope you can see her. The lady to the left, the other one, the mom in the picture, is my grandmother. And the little girl is my mother. And she's so important to me because my grandmother survived the Holocaust in 5 concentration camps and a death march, which is awful, obviously. But she was the one that emerged from that still loving, still believing in humanity. And if you've seen humanity at its worst, with its killing forces and its fierce, violent discrimination, and you can still believe people are good, to me, you are a saint. And I asked her about the Germans, and she told me in every people there's good and there's bad. You can never, ever, ever just like say one people's like this or one people's that. You always have to judge everybody to his good heart until the negative is proven. But everybody's getting like the benefit of the doubt. And I think that's very beautiful. So to me, she's a great role model. She told me always to look for the good in people, and that even in places like Auschwitz, there was still love and there was still solidarity. So what should I do then with all that information? I love this quote: if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. I grew up in a Jewish youth movement called Happening Door, and it was very related to things like how important it was to express your voice, how do you exist in relationship to others, lead by example, live your ideals. It was very connected to the Israeli-Palestinian peace process that was still actually in force then. I remember that Rabin got killed when I was a young girl, and I felt like the whole peace process died with him. And that was something that had a lot of impact on me throughout all of my life. So I actually moved with the Jewish youth movement to Israel, and I had all the stereotypes in my head about Muslims and Jews and the way I was raised. And actually, when I was living in a kibbutz in the desert, I became really deep friends with a Bedouin girl called Wessal, a Muslim Bedouin girl. And she completely changed my view on how I was raised with a lot of stereotypes that I saw on the news and everything. And I became a really close friend to her. And I took her to my place in the kibbutz, which was frowned upon. And one time there was a lady that made a really, we were sorting melons in the hot sun. And there was a lady that said something awful about, I remember, I think it was about Palestinians. And I was so angry, and about the Bedouins, that not going back to the kibbutz, I decided to eat with them and stay with them. And I sat on the floor in their caravan. And I went to their weddings and I befriended them. And it totally changed my view about like diversity. And also living in that kibbutz, I was living with a young group, youngsters from everywhere. They were from the United States and Mexico. There were Russians. They were from everywhere. So this was the first time I viewed myself as a European. I just always thought I was Dutch. Like, I know, Europe, can you eat that? Like, I know it's a continent, right? But we're so different between the French and the Italians and the Dutch and the, you know, all these other countries. But suddenly they saw me as a European. So this was an extra identity I never thought I had, that I started to, you know, look at the multi-layers of identity in a very interesting way. With all that knowledge and all that experience and all that feelings, I came back to the Netherlands and thought, what can I do to contribute to society? I always wanted to work internationally. I thought I would be a lawyer, to be honest. And then studying a bit, I decided that the law didn't necessarily mean justice per se. So sometimes you need the law, but I felt for me there was the other path to justice and equality. And that was this program, A Classroom of Difference, that is built on the first article of the Dutch Constitution, which you can see in the presentation. And that's the equality article, that you cannot discriminate on grounds of religion, belief, political opinion, race, sex, or any other reasons. There were a lot of programs against racism. There were programs against homophobia. There were programs against a lot of things, but there was not one program that said you cannot shop in the first article of the Constitution. If you are very passionate about like religious rights, you cannot be like, you cannot at the same time discriminate, let's say, people on ground of their sex. If you are very much about standing up for, I don't know, let's say sexual freedom or against homophobia, you cannot at the same time bash Muslims or Jews. So this is a total package. And to me, that was really important because I feel all people deserve equal opportunities. So we started to do this for youngsters in a really interactive way, with like games and like with theater, and with, it was something they were not used to at school at all. And that changed a lot because we worked in predominantly schools with a big Muslim population to start with. Also because there were unfortunately pretty underprivileged in the city of Amsterdam, and we decided to, you know, that they deserved extra chances and extra education on this. And there were like beautiful things that came out of that. Also, like these kids felt more empowered to be proud of their bicultural identity, proud of their religion, proud of their background, proud of all the things they have extra to their identity. And some that thought they would never get hired are now doctors. Some are in the city municipality. So this was a nice program. Unfortunately, because of all kinds of cuts and reasons and the recession before this program stopped, but it went on in a different shape. And it was very about culture, but I wanted to do something specifically about religion. And there was a lot of anti-Semitism against my particular synagogue by students of the neighboring school. So we started, instead of building higher fences, we started this program called Getting to Know Your Neighbors. And it was a very open program. It's from kids age 10 until, let's say, youngsters 24. And it's really, 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 how can I say it, empowering, open. We joke about our own traditions, about everything. There's no taboos. They can say everything they want. And it's very successful. We had, I think now, about 14,000 students. I see I'm running out of time, so I'll keep it short. There's also Mo and Most. This is the program I'm most proud of. It's a Jewish Muslim leadership project for young professionals. Started during the Gaza war, when the communities were really, you know, battling with each other. And I decided it was time for a Muslim-Jewish leadership program, which didn't exist in my country. Everybody thought it was crazy. And this is the result. This is them in an expert weekend with an imam and a rabbi. They do a lot of workshops. They hosted Palestinian-Israeli peace groups. They go into schools. They do dinners, all kinds of stuff. And they are friends, eventually. We scouted them when they were in their 20s, early 30s. And they also became leaders. Some are vice mayor of Amsterdam. Some are theater makers. Some are artists. Some are lawyers. It's amazing what they did. And they still reach out to each other. Okay, I will conclude with this one. I won't finish the whole presentation. This is in together with the mosque and the synagogue. And it was celebrating the Passover story, but both from the Jewish and Muslim perspective. So you have the classical Passover story from the Jewish perspective, but we had the Muslim kids reading how the thing of Musa in Egypt was through the lens of the Quran. So it was really beautiful to celebrate this together with kids. National respect movement is another thing. I really believe in role models, and these are Dutch famous role models in various sections. Another thing, I'm gonna skip it. You can ask me questions later. I don't want to take up too much time of the rest. Thank you. And now I have to stop sharing my screen and mute myself.
Thank you, Chantal. Thank you for the insights. Thank you for bringing closer to us the importance of role models, and for the youth to see that they are empowered by their experiences and their diversity. Thank you very much. Participants, you may put any questions you have directly to Chantal in the question and the Q&A panel down the bottom. And in the meantime, Tim, it's your turn to give your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you very much for the privilege of being invited to share. Greetings from Brisbane in Australia. It's evening here, and it's lovely to see other people all in the light on another side of the planet. I am currently with a Christian organisation here in Australia called Scripps Union, and my role is broadly called cross-cultural innovation. So it covers a broad spectrum of work that is interfaith, but also in the multicultural space of Australia. But before that, I spent 8 years with a charity called The Feast, which I'll share a little bit about, and that was based in the UK. The work here is covers a couple of areas that are unique to Australia. In Australia, we get to have faith-based school chaplains. So the organisation I work for employs a couple over 500 chaplains working in about 800 or 900 of the state schools. That's just here in Queensland. And nationally, there's about 2,500 chaplains. A good portion of their funding comes from our national government. In Queensland, we run about 100 camps and holiday programs, residential and day camps. And we're also an RTO, training tomorrow's youth and children's workers. So in each of those spaces, cultural sensitivity, the ability to help modern day young people to live well in a diverse, richly diverse, vibrantly diverse country is a challenge that I'm looking to serve from within this organisation and through our partners. But the organisation that founded my work, and which I actually see as a privilege in sharing with you over these short 10 minutes, is the journey I've been on since I joined The Feast in early 2010. The Feast was founded by a Christian youth worker who also worked for Scripps Union. It's an organisation that's around the world, but that work invited him into schools that were different to him, kids that were usually South Asian, largely Muslim, but also Sikh and Hindu. And here he was trying to work out what youth work looked like when he, as a Christian, found himself working with children of other faiths. And he started a process, he researched, he networked, and he started running youth encounters where he brought small groups of these young people together. And that led him to forming a charity, which is called The Feast. It's a great name. One of the things that people of different faiths and cultures enjoy when we come together is food. And we certainly thought that, the founders of The Feast thought that food was a great metaphor for what we were hoping to achieve amongst the young people of the UK, and now as it's rolled out to elsewhere in the world. So a part of the work was bringing starkly different young people together. This was an example from when I was in the UK. We had a group of students that went to a school that was connected to the Royal Ballet of the UK, training up ballet, the future ballet dancers of the UK. And they were only a couple of kilometres from a richly diverse school that was predominantly Muslim, but of a very different community group to the young people that were in the ballet school. So we brought these two groups of kids together and enabled them to have a conversation, enabled them to talk openly with each other. And that led to incredible awakenings for what life is like from a very different perspective. But because of the kernel of this work that happened in Birmingham, we got to share it with other places around the UK. So the Feast formed in Bradford in the north, in Luton and Tower Hamlets further south. And it is also spread to Switzerland, to Lebanon. And this is a photo of some of the schools work that happens in Lebanon, in Beirut. In Beirut, it's called khubz mela, which is bread and salt in Lebanese Arabic. And it defines also a hospitality metaphor of what it's like for people to come together and share friendship and share peace with each other. And in this photo are young people from a Maronite Christian community. And on the other side are Sunni Muslims. They lived in the same community, they lived parallel lives, but it wasn't until two of their teachers from their schools committed to help them come together to form friendships based on healthy dialogue. And that was where The Feast grew, and now I'm hoping that it's a part of our work here in Australia. The challenge for this talk was to share about building a culture, and while I'm in Australia now and not doing as much pure interfaith work as I'd love to do, I'm now working in a space very heavily inspired by the young people that I got to work with in England. And I'm very inspired by what The Feast enabled me to do, and so want to create not just a culture, but a movement where young people are committed to meeting up with each other, learning to talk about themselves and hear about other people different to them, and so creating bonds, bridges, networks, whatever we might call it, across societies to hopefully change their parents, their communities, their faith groups, and the world. So you'll excuse me for taking this moment to reflect, but I've come up with, I guess, the stages that I've gone on in working out what's making it possible to sustain a movement of interfaith dialogue amongst young people in Australia, as I've now moved away from the feast, which is based in Birmingham. I guess the first was my why, and forming a team, forming a core group of people who were committed to a positive why was fundamental to seeing such a movement, such a culture be sustained. For me, it is my connection with God as a Christian. I understand God as a God of love, and he calls me to love him and love others. So the big part of my why is God, but it's not the same for everyone, and there's no right why. The problem is that to try and sustain a culture, to build a culture, the whys are tested. If the whys are negative, if the reason I'm coming is I just want to convert, or if the reason I'm coming is I just want to overcome persecution of my people group, there are times when, as we get into dialogue, as we meet different people, that why starts to crumble. And so we have to go deeper into what will actually could motivate me to get to others and to sustain a relationship process with people who much of the time, they do drive us insane. They are different to us for a reason. But the process of digging deeper and nurturing and sustaining my deeper why has been so critical to me and to those that have maintained a journey in this work and have stayed involved in it from being a 13-year-old teenager through to being a young leader in the feast or in other work. The second layer is the who, and it's the recognition that sometimes we're in a multicultural space. So where I lived in Birmingham, all my neighbours were Pakistani. But in other cultures, we may either have a project, it could be sport, or it could be the schools that we work in. Who are these young people? What are the biggest building blocks in their lives? What are their identity? If faith is a big part of their identity, is faith being addressed? Is it being addressed in a healthy way? One of the challenges for our state schools in Australia is that they almost assume that faith is an optional part of the identity of a child, and they leave it outside. They say that's what you do in your family, that's what you do in your mosque, your synagogue, or your church. But we believe that the young people need to be treated in whole, in all of who they are. And if faith is a big part of who they are, then we need to find ways for them to express, live, understand that. That's a part of their well-being as a young person. So how do we understand them, and how do they understand themselves? How do they feel proud of being a young person of faith, or a young person of colour, or of a young person of gender, whatever it might be? So understanding them and responding and nurturing and creating our work for them, but also understanding ourselves. How do I understand myself as a Christian, as a male, as a white Australian in a country that has an ancient Aboriginal history where all my roots are actually English? So how do I understand my own cultural and faith identity? The big part of adding to these layers is the discussions around who I am and who are you and how do we live well together. So the third stage, which was heavily influenced by the feast's work, was a how. Okay, I've committed to being your friend. I'm now working out who you are. So what does it mean to be in conversation with you? Now, the feast created a set of rules. They called them their guidelines for dialogue. Now, I'm sure lots of organisations, I'm sure my co-presenters today and KAICIID and others have got guidelines, have got rules that create the safe space, that create the trainer wheels for the conversations that will happen when you bring two people together who are different, who have different stories, have different faiths, different beliefs, different worldviews. So the feast gifted us these rules, and I heavily use these in my discussions between Aboriginal young people, Chinese young people, kids of the Muslim faith, kids of the Sikh faith are part of my work now. And this work challenges me to listen to all of them, but also to speak openly, to not stay quiet, but to learn to find respectful ways to speak up. Sometimes it's easier to just listen, or it's easier to just talk, but how do we do them both together? And two other rules are that I will learn to speak positively about my faith, not negatively about yours. So this was a challenge for many of us, because so often when we come to this, we're used to framing our engagement with the other with around our belief system and why we're right. But how can I create an environment where each person can bring all of who they are, the distinctives of who they are and what they believe, to the table? So this is how everything that I do that has been done with the feast, that's been done through Switzerland, Lebanon and elsewhere, is various versions of these commitments to talk with each other, to listen, to frame the questions that I ask you in a way that invites you to share all of what you believe. Now, the challenge of this is that it's challenging, it's difficult, it's awkward, because you'll hear stuff that you don't like or agree with. But such is the nature of healthy dialogue, in coming into a sustaining way that I can live really well with people who are different to me. So lastly, the last stage that I've reflected on as I process my wonderful time at the feast, and now as I'm building on this movement of young people engaged in diverse conversations today, is what? Now, in Australia, we call it CHAT. CHAT stands for Cultural Hearing, Asking, Telling. It's taken the form of a structured school program. It's taken the form of a day camps where we use sport. We get different groups of kids together and we teach them to have conversations about their cultural and faith journey. I do training in this country where I take people to different places of worship. And this process of sustaining different formats, different programs where young people come together. I adore the work of the Feast, where they bring small groups of young people of different faiths and cultures together. And that is definitely a place that I long to head to here in Australia, where I get small groups of Sikh, Jewish, Muslim, Christian kids to come together, to have fun, to have a feast, to have a really rewarding, fun environment together. But in the core of that, at the center of that, is wholesome, vibrant conversation. You might call it dialogue, but kids don't like the word dialogue. It sounds a bit academic. But when you get them together over pizza,
Tim, your transmission has frozen. Can you hear me? Oh, we lost Tim. I'm not sure if our IT people can cut in to help there. Okay, Tim, I hope you can hear me. I'm going to move forward, and thank you for your presentation and for sharing these tools, and which I'm sure many people will find really, really useful. Sorry, my screen just changed. I think, unfortunately, we even lost Tim now. So that was, yeah, when you see a movement growing like that, it's really inspirational. And for our further inspiration, we turn now to Radia. And Radia, if you'd like to begin with your presentation, and in the meantime, we'll see if we can get Tim back. Thank you.
So hello everyone, my name is Radia, I'm 28 years old, and I'm here to share with you the work that we do in KAICIID. So I haven't chosen specific initiative because our organization, it's on like the majority of what we do is about empowering youth, because we're a youth-led interfaith organization. So I'm going to share with you what we do, what is our project, what is our initiatives, and that has been going on for 11 years now. And then I'm going to share with you some tips on how to better empower youth to build a culture of dialogue. And I'm going to finish with a little focus on the COVID-19 situation, and on how our young leaders in KAICIID are trying to step up for this global crisis that we are living. And I'm going to share with you all the links that I saw that it was a question in the chat, so I'm going to share with you all the links. So KAICIID is an interfaith youth movement. We have 3 big programs. One program, it's about a peace education program that allows young people to experience in a good way interfaith diversity. We have one program that is called Interfaith Tour that allows 4 youngsters to go around the world every 2 years to inspire through an online path through interfaith initiatives around the world. And we have a third program that we work with companies, private companies, on how to manage faith diversity and interfaith diversity. So to enter a little bit the details, I'm sorry I don't have all the slides in English, but I'm going to translate everything. The next slides are in English. So KAICIID France, it's the first program. We have empowered and trained more than 150,000 young people. Créateurs de liens means connectors, means link creators. We want to empower them to create links between people who are really diverse. We are in more than 50 cities in France and in Europe. So France, Belgium, Germany, and the UK. And what we do is that we have dialogue activities, we have solidarity work, and we have outreach program. Dialogue activities, the main goal is to say that we want to exchange on our faith, our beliefs, our conviction, because we gather young people from 15 to 35, and they are Jewish, Christians, Muslims, but also atheists, agnostics, deists. We really have all the kind of beliefs, and that is really important, especially in the context of France, because as you know, in France, we have like a very secular country, and more than 45% of the population doesn't have a religious belief. So it's really important for us to gather everyone in terms of peace building and all the youth that wants to engage in peace building. So the dialogue activities, it's about how to engage our own beliefs, how to engage our own spiritual resources. And the goal is at the end of the dialogue activities, we have to agree to disagree. It's really important, like, to arrive to a point where you're not here to convince someone, you're not here to try to preach for your own belief, but you're here to accept, to meet, to respect the other. But we don't want to just stay on a path where we just agree to disagree. We need to find some common goal. So that's why we have solidarity work, because we agree to disagree on our faith, but we agree on something bigger than us, which is the solidarity, which is the famous golden rule, which is to build a society when we are in a society where we are here for each other. So all the group of KAICIID in the 50 local antenna, they build solidarity actions such as on environmental issues, on working with, for example, Caritas and helping people in need, or going to do blood drive, especially in times of the COVID situation. We need a lot of blood in hospitals, so it's kind of an activity that we share. And also why we have dialogue, solidarity, and then outreach program, because it's really important when we learn to meet somebody, when we learn to meet the other, when we learn how to live in a world which is diverse, which is interfaithly diverse, we need to outreach to other people. So that's why all the members of KAICIID, all the volunteers, go to school and do this prejudices deconstruction. They talk about all the taboo topic. They talk about the news and how it's related to interfaith and to peace building. We go and talk about experience of the young people and stuff like that. So all the young volunteers of KAICIID do dialogue, solidarity, and outreach program. It's really all, it's very important to do all these three activities so they can be peace builders, young ambassadors of peace. And that's what we try to do in KAICIID France. The interfaith tour is, so as I told you, it's for young people that goes around the world every 2 years to meet with interfaith initiatives. Maybe one of you guys have met some of the teams that went in the world. They study 80 countries and they met with more than 1,400 initiatives around the world. Why do we do that? Because we think that our interfaith practices in France we cannot be innovative if we just stay in looking at what we do in France. We want to see what is going on in the world so we can be inspired, so we can innovate on our practices, so we can learn better, and also seeing that for young people can be role model and really engage people on social media on, wow, look, everyone is doing amazing work here in the Fiji, here in Bosnia-Herzegovina, here in Morocco, and to see that can really empower people to engage. And the third program, so the Convivencia Conseil, so Convivencia means to coexist in Spanish, and it's about creating links in companies, in private companies. And why it's very important, why we created this program, because when we're young, either we're in school or university, but also we can work. And since we're working with young people from 15 to 35, we also want to build safe spaces in private companies, but also public sectors where we can have work. And we see that we spend more than, I don't know, like 2/3 of our life in our work. And it's important to manage to train people to better manage the faith diversity in the work business. So also like the collaborators, also the workers can be interfaith ambassadors. So that's our 3 programs. Then I would like, so how to empower young people to better engage with these 3 programs. Our tips, I've decided to share with you 3 tips. Build pluralistic and inclusive group. What is really important and what we discover in our work is that, I mean, of course you all know that, but it's important to say it, that yes, our groups of young people are diverse in terms of faith, but they're also diverse in terms of a lot of things, such as gender, sexual orientation, origins, ethnicity, and a lot of things. And it's important that even though we have the interfaith mean, that we can be a safe space to other kind of diversities. And also, as our faith is to accept everyone, each and every one of them, with their plural identity. It's very important, and we have a lot of practices to better engage people with their plural identity. The second one is to strengthen the feeling of belonging. We discover that the young people can better engage, and they can not just come once or twice, but they're really being volunteers and stay in the organization by strengthening the feeling of belonging. They need to feel that they are part of a movement. We have a song with KAICIID, we have a choreography, we have colors, we have t-shirts, we have a lot of things that made us feel part of something, part of a movement, part of a movement that is building society. And the third, to give the power and responsibilities. So that I was talking about being a youth-led organization. Well, when you're above 35 years old, you cannot take responsibilities in KAICIID. The power is in the hand of young people. And that is really interesting because I see a lot of people calling me saying, yeah, I really want to have young people in our conference as participants. And I'm like, no, we're not doing that. Either you want us to be in part of the organization, part of panelists, part of the organizing and saying what is going to be the topic of the conference, either you're not going to have young people. So that is really important, and that's the most important tips for me on how to engage and how to empower youth to be peace builders and interfaith ambassador, is to give them the power to tell, okay, so I'm not just going to call them at the end when everything is settled, everything is organized, but I'm going to give them responsibilities at the very beginning. And it might be going out of a comfort zone, but it's really, really, really important, and that's what we try to do with all our partners. Then just to finish on youth response to the COVID situation. So we do everything online now, all our dialogue activities on how to share, how to live spirituality alone or spirituality at home. Especially we had a lot of talks on Pesach, on Easter, and on Ramadan that is coming. So we organize ourselves, we share good practices on how to better do that. Solidarity work, we have a lot of groups of KAICIID who are sewing masks for the population, but also cooking for the homeless people and cooking for the people in hospitals. And also we go and give our blood, do a lot of blood drives. So that's examples, but I can answer more questions on how we respond to the COVID situation. And to go further, I'm going to send you some links on the Interface Tour program in Kosovo and New Zealand, but also our video on to call to action. And I'm going to send you also the link of our website. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Radia. I just saw something flash at the bottom of my screen, nourishment for the mind from all three of you. It's very enriching. And I just took with me myself the understanding of the self, these plural influences that we as adults with the youth have, and getting them to understand that and to bring them in. And it's really so important. Thank you very much for the presentation and for sharing your tips and tools there, how the youth can be engaged, how we can empower them, to all three of you. But before we go over to the Q&A, Tim, I know you sent me a little message that you were basically finished in good timing, but I would like you to just round off your presentation at that time, and then we can move forward.
Great, thank you, Liz. Yes, I was nearly finished. I guess one thing I probably hasn't made it clear, but the work that I've been involved in has been younger. It's been at the upper primary school and teenage age, which I think, just listening to the other speakers, fantastic work with leadership development. But I think the specific part that the feast and now the work I'm doing with SU is focused at a younger age range, so has a range of other opportunities and challenges that come with that. But yeah, I think I've thoroughly enjoyed seeing young people come out of their shells as they have been invited into healthy dialogue, as they've met with someone of a different, use the differences, and found that they can be all of who they are, but go into this grappling of loving, caring about, wanting to go on a journey with someone who's different to them. So yeah, the journey that I've been on this has given me a great chance to reflect on it, and I'm hoping that, inspired again and nurtured by other speakers, it's a spur on to continue the work here in Australia. So thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Yes, the work with children and youth is certainly highly rewarding, and it's commendable work that's going on. So before we go into the Q&A, the first thing is that you've been asked if you could share your emails and your website links. If you could put that into the chat line, I think I've been asked to ask you to do that. If that would be great. A lot of people are asking. And then the first question that we've had coming up is, I hope you can multitask while I keep talking and you're putting your emails in. How do you address differences in different religious communities by those with strong ideas? What are the challenges with stereotypes of other religions and cultures within youth? So we go through the sequence that we presented with. I invite Chantal to respond first.
Yes, you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So it's very hard to include the exclusivists, as to say, right? Like people with ideas that are really tough. And I think I got this question and I answered it, but then it was marked answered. But I think.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that was my mistake because I answered it. But actually, it's equally important to do this advocacy work in your own community. And for example, I'm thinking like, because I got also a specific question on how do you include people and encourage people if like media portrays you as enemies, like often happens with the Jewish and Muslim community, etc. Like for the Mo's Friendship and Leadership program, I decided to invite the son of a very Orthodox rabbi to the program. And that did a lot, because the fact that he participated in a 1.5-year intense program with also Reform Jews and Orthodox Muslims and secular and everything meant a lot, because that actually opened up discussion to these kinds of programs within that spectrum of the community. And it doesn't help for me as a pretty progressive Jewish woman to go to the Orthodox community, say, you have to be engaged in dialogue work because Muslims are amazing. It doesn't work like that. You need to do the work first inside your own community. And actually that's harder sometimes than the interfaith work, because the interfaith workers are usually people that are into interfaith work, right? Same in the Muslim community. It's, for example, there, we had a very strict teacher of children who was like with wearing a beard and praying very intensely, and was really, you could say, a very strictly Orthodox Muslim. And for him to participate and befriend others and believe in this is much stronger, again, than somebody that is already into this stuff saying it. So basically, the work you have to do first, it's like when you want to change the world, you work on yourself. And when you want to do interfaith work, you first make sure your own community is ready for it. And you will not have everyone. There will still be people skeptical or angry, but at least you have to try, right? Because if not, you will just be preaching to the choir. And I also want to applaud Radia, because I met Radia at Washington, and she was really firm in this conference, saying like, yes, we have to be involved in the beginning and not just at the end. And I love that, because this youth movement I grew up in, you are out at 25. They're like, they're super, super young. And to me, I was really sad when I had to leave, by the way. But I grew up in a similar kind of circumstance.
Yeah, I'm so happy to see you again after Washington.
Oh wait, I have to mute myself again.
Thank you, Chantal. Can I open, Tim? Would you like to address this question as well?
Yeah, just the comment on bringing people who are really strong in their faith or really exclusivist. What's interesting for me is I come from, I would say personally, I come from a fairly conservative Christian background, evangelical, a fairly conservative branch of the evangelical church. And it took people to lead the way for me to come into this space. It took pioneers of the movement I'm in, Scripture Union, and also of the Feast, who I could trust and who could say it's okay to come into a dialogue space. And then with the Feast, we actually employed people who were converts to Islam. We employed quite conservative Muslim and Sikh youth leaders. And I think partly my story of having come on a journey from being a fairly closed mindset and then awakening to the fact that I need to love others and care about them, and it's okay to do that. I'm not denying myself. I think attracted others who probably had a similar story, that they found security in an environment where people could be fully practicing and believing their faith in their set way. So I certainly think it is more work, maybe more relationship building, and certainly trust building with the parts of our community that are very firm in their beliefs and quite maybe antagonistic towards others. But when the trust is built, when their leaders and their pioneers come in, it can be a very rewarding space to be in dialogue with others.
Thank you, Tim. Radia, do you have anything to add for us?
Just a little thing, because you said it all. We always try to balance identity and the otherness, to see how my own identity cannot like go on the other's identity, and like how the other's identity cannot like erase my own identity. And we had like strong people that it was really difficult for them at the beginning. Concretely, I can give you a really small example. For example, we had people that really want to have a beer at dinner, and people who doesn't want to sit at a table where there is alcohol, or we have people that wants to do that's, for example, even within a religious community. For example, when we go to church, some Catholic wants to applaud, and some other don't want to applaud and thinks it's forbidden. So we had like fights, and it's important to like be in disagreement. And we had like fights on people on what you don't like, you're not allowed to do that, and you're not allowed to do that. So we really try to build a framework. It's never easy. All the cases are different, but really have like a principle grounds, and really try every day, every single second, to find the balance between identity and otherness.
Thank you very much. Wonderful answers, inspiring again. So another question we've had is, can each of you share one advice on how to bridge differences and work with youth from their experience? I open it up to someone to answer from the panel so that we can fill some time. At least we're short on time, so I don't mean to fill it, I mean to answer the question nicely.
Can you give the question again? Sorry, Elizabeth.
Yes. Can each of you share one advice on how to bridge differences and work with youth from their experience? So your experience.
Chantel, going to go first?
So I highly believe in doing stuff. Especially young people like to do stuff. I don't say it's not important to talk. Dialogue is important, but give them a common goal and a common thing to strive for. Exactly as Radia said in her presentation, right? It is also important to do stuff despite your differences, something bigger. For example, with the Jewish Muslim leadership group, what we did is, and they're very different, right? It's like within their groups, they're very different. But when the refugee crisis reached its height, like 2 years ago, our national organization that was supposed to take refugees in couldn't deal with it anymore, and they didn't want to take them in after working hours. Seriously, this happened. So actually, in Jewish Muslim duos, like as two partners in partnership groups, they went to the central station of Amsterdam to just basically help Syrian and other refugees who were arriving, despite their political opinions, by the way, which vary very much from right to left, just as a humane way of doing. And that was, for them, I think, first of all, how these people reacted, like, what? You're like, from what? You're from a Jewish Muslim leadership group? What is that? They were so surprised. But also just to help people in need. And this is big, but you can also do something small. It can be for elderly people. It can be for homeless. It can just be to do something for school kids, but to have them do something together. I think that is a very good, that would be my first tip. Yeah, now I'm gonna mute.
My tip is in complements but contrasts with Chantel's. I saw one of my formative youth encounter events I saw when I joined the Feast in England was a police football tournament run by the counter-terrorism police. And they looked across a group of young men, mainly teenage boys playing football, and they had black African heritage background boys, white boys, and boys across South Asia, and they thought they were doing a great job by getting them all to play football together. And as they finished, they'd all go back into their tribes and their communities, and that even though they spent the afternoon playing sport, I felt a conviction that there was not enough to have just done something together. There needed to be that talk. And that's not saying that what Chantel said is not. I think there is a very big part of working together on something, but in working together, you are talking. So it sort of comes as a result of doing that project together. But a conviction for teenage work that I've always had is that it may be good to come together and have a fun activity. I mentioned, I'm not sure when I cut out before, but going to a trampoline place, playing football, doing an art project, cooking together. Whatever the activity was that was fun and rewarding to be together, we used to intertwine into everything conversation. We used our guidelines and our principles of good youth work to create the safety for that, a group deal, whatever you might call it, to create the rules, and we protected those rules. But in the midst of that, we would say, what does your faith tell you about right and wrong? In your faith, where do you get to learn how to live it out? In your culture, how do you celebrate births or marriages or something that's of great significance? So asking them these neutral questions that everyone could come and share something of themselves created the glue, created a relational glue where they had to be honest and open to be sharing. So I certainly think that the central pillar, I guess, to my experience with teenagers is creating safe spaces for conversation. As I say, I avoid the word dialogue a bit because it's a bit meaty, but we call it chat in Australia. But how do you create space for these kids to talk to each other about some of the deeper things that they're going on in their world?
And for me, I shared some of the tips, but I have a new one for you. Let us do mistakes. It's super important also to accept that we are, by our experience, we are still going to make a lot of mistakes in the doing, in the activities. And it's also by making mistakes that we learn and that we practice on how to better be with each other and on how to be leaders and to engage. And a lot of young people say, okay, I will not be able to do that. I cannot do that because it's too much or it's too hard, or yeah, it's something that I could never imagine doing. But if you want us to go outside of our comfort zone, let us make mistakes.
Thank you so much. Maybe Radia, you can stay on. We have one more question. And I think it rolls in very nicely with the advices that you've just been giving with the openness, make mistakes, chat. And we had a question come in about safe spaces. How do you create that safe space within which these youth can be so open with one another, they can make their mistakes? Yeah, and I make this the last question because we have about 5 minutes left, maximum okay. 10. And maybe Radia, you'd like to start this time.
It's super complicated and it's super hard to build a safe space, and every one of us in a space together, we should be responsible for making the safe space. We should build it together. But in KAICIID, we train people for a whole year before they can take responsibilities and they can build safe spaces for other participants. And for me, the tips would be first to build and to talk about the rules of the safe space at the beginning. It may take time. It might see like, oh, but what if we write the rules and then just read them and we do the activities? No, we have to build the ground rules together so everyone can have them in their in their heart, and so the safe space can be built. So write together the ground rules. Second, it's really important to build skills on nonviolent communication. Talk about I feel that, well, you know all the rules of the nonviolent communication, but it's for all our volunteers that are trained on nonviolent communication. And the third rule I would like to share, it's also never insist. If someone doesn't want to share the first day, maybe this person is going to share the second or the third or 3 months later. It's really important to accept observers, to accept them and to call them back and say, it was important for us that you were there, even though the person haven't talked at the beginning. So to make everyone really feel that it's important for us, organizer, that they are here. It's not just having a conference of 80 people. It's about having a conference with Chantal, Tim, Anya, Elizabeth, knowing the people that are here and make them feel important.
Can I echo everything that was Radi just said? I think helping the kids to set the rules for the space is very empowering for them, and also that rule of they get to control it, to say that I don't feel comfortable, can we stop the conversation? To give them that degree of power over the space is really important. One little trick that we found it much easier to create the safe space is keep the environments small, the numbers of young people small. So when we brought teenagers together, we would often have 4 or 5 of one community meeting with 4 or 5 of another. When the feast was first founded, they were bringing 60 kids together, so it was possible to do it big, but we found it much harder to create the safe space when you had so many people who have such difference going on, and you had managing of teenagers in any gathering. So when we brought smaller groups together, it made the logistics of running the activity together easier, and it made it easier to create a safe space for kids to get to know each other, to set those rules, and then to start talking.
Yes, well, I'm going to add a little thing because we have nonviolent communication also as a cornerstone. And there's one thing extra, I would say, that touches upon, for whoever knows this, it's deep democracy, which means that people should be safe. So we do the ground rules, we discuss about it, we have every group make their own ground rules and be able to even rediscuss them when they don't feel comfortable at whatever point, but also to give a safe space for people to voice a minority standpoint. Like even if, because it can be very unsafe if 20 people think something and out of the 20, 2 have a different opinion. So what I always try to do is when there's 2 with a different opinion, usually it's wider spread, but only 2 want to, have the guts to express it. So I always want to include the minority standpoint in majority decision making. So not to overrule people, not overrule their feelings, not overrule their opinion, even when it's different, but to see what do you need to go on with whatever activity you are doing, or what is it you want to add, or what is it that worries you, to give a space, a safe space for everyone. And that also means the minority standpoints, and sometimes you need agreeing to disagree. And just touch upon 1 second more what you said of the activities that I meant. It's always after intensive dialogues. But in my country, at some point, there were just dialogues and everyone was so done with not ever doing something that we started to add it afterwards. Yeah.
Thank you so much for those wonderful answers, for giving us tools to help us or others with their youth work and the empowerment of youth. We don't have any more time to go through any more questions that have been sent through. If you have anything specifically, I believe the panelists have now shared their email addresses and links to their organizations. So if you have something specific for them, I believe I'm speaking for them, please go ahead and send an email. We also have another youth webinar coming up. I'm not quite sure on what date, but please do watch the Dialogue Knowledge Hub platform. We will be putting the announcement in very shortly for that. So I thank you all. I thank you, Radia, Chantal, Tim, as I see you in my screen. And I thank all the participants and for the great questions, great presentations, and inspiration to us all. Thank you, and look forward to seeing everybody again soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for moderating this. And thank you, KAICIID, for organizing everything. It was great talking to you all.
Yes, it was. We have to do this again. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
And lots of health to everyone. And have a great time finishing your Easter holidays, your Passover, upcoming Ramadan. Mabruk, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.